Hi, everyone. Welcome to this meeting of presenting the COVID-19 social impacts data. We'll just give a few more minutes for people to come in. Okay, welcome. Wonderful. So, as you can see here, everyone, so this is our last, we've been doing weekly meetings. The COVID Social Impacts Network has been doing weekly meetings since March, when the COVID measures were put in place here in Canada, in order to give you real-time data on what Canadians' attitudes and behaviors, what Canadians are thinking during this pandemic. As many of you know who have joined since the beginning, we really hope that the work that the research team at the Association for Canadian Studies and all of our guest speakers have presented has been useful to your work as we get through this pandemic together. So today, as you can see here, we have a really an agenda with a lot of different insights to be gained. I'm going to soon pass the speaking. Oh my goodness. Anyway, I'm going to soon let Nora Spinks, the CEO of the Vanier Institute of the Family, start speaking, and she's going to present on family counseling and family therapy in Canada. And then we'll hear from Jasmine Thomas, who's a postdoctoral student in the Department of Sociology at the University of Manitoba, with recent data from Newcomers and Indigenous people across the three countries on the North American continent on how the COVID measures have impacted them. And then we'll hear from the ACS research team as well today. And if it's not already obvious to the few francophones that may be on this call, les présentations aujourd'hui va dérouler en anglais. But if you do have questions, don't hesitate to ask in French. And I'm going to stop sharing my screen now so that Nora, you can share yours. We really encourage all questions to be asked either in the Q&A, in the chat, or please raise your hand and I will unmute you.
Great. Thank you so much. It's a pleasure to be here. I'm just going to provide you with a bit of an insight into a survey that we've been conducting with family therapists and family counselors across the country. For those of you that don't know, I'm going to stop sharing this one and, maybe I can do it this way. Okay. As you know, we've been a part of the Social Impacts Network since day one and really believe in both the data that we're collecting, but also in the way that it's being disseminated and mobilized. We've produced a number of fact sheets and taken a lot of the information and made it accessible to individuals who study, serve, and support families across the country and around the world. We've been drilling down into some very family specific impacts of COVID-19, and will continue to do so for years to come. We've also been working very closely with StatsCan. They seconded 5 senior analysts to us over the summer so that we've been able to analyze some of this data that I'm going to be sharing with you today. We've also been tracking policy programs and services that have been implemented since COVID. So we're sort of eventually we'll be able to do parallels and to see what impacts these initiatives have had on family experiences. The bottom line is in the first, what we're calling the first phase, so phase 1 of COVID, which was basically from March 10th, 11th, 13th, depending on where you are in the country, down to now, as we're starting to roll out the vaccines. So the first phase was up to September-ish, and then September to December is sort of phase 2, and then into 2021 we're considering phase 3. And I'm going to share with you the data that we have for phase 1. clearly we had a spirit of generosity and gratitude that was the overwhelming concept for this particular period. We also were able to identify that every system, whether it was a family system, the healthcare system, the education system, the justice system, child welfare, home care, every single one of those systems had its strengths and equally its weaknesses magnified, amplified, and intensified. And so what we wanted to do is to look at the various sources of data and do some cross-checking. So we were hearing from the Leger data, for example, that families were communicating more, couples were having more meaningful conversations, they were disagreeing less. And we wanted to verify that. So we spoke to children to see if their families were actually getting along. And it was pretty good. They were very much complementary. But we also wanted to go to the family therapists and the family lawyers. And we wanted to ask them what they were seeing in their office and how they were making out during this particular period. And like families and like all the other systems, there was a phase one was really a period of adaptation, learning, growing, developing, experimenting, discovering. And so that was true too with family therapists. So what I want to share with you is a different presentation. I'm going to stop this one and I'm going to open up a different one. Okay, hold on.
Sure.
I'm not sure why Zoom is doing this to me, but I'll see what I can do with this one. So we went to the children and youth, and we, no, this is not the right one. Hold on, this is an older version. And I just have to get to you the current version. Okay. All right, here we go. So we asked family therapists what they were doing, and we had just over 1,000 therapists. We conducted this survey in partnership with the Canadian Counselling on Psychotherapy and the Canadian Association of Marriage and Family Therapists. And about 80% were women, 19% men, and 1% other. And the vast majority of those had their master's degrees, and they will continue to, as most therapists do, have their master's. The 10% includes those PhD candidates. We covered all provinces, but no territories, and we missed out on the far north and the far west of Quebec and the far north of Ontario. The vast majority of therapists continued to work through pandemic. And I'm sorry, I'm going to do this one more time. I'm going to exit all of this, and I am going to restart my PowerPoint.
Oh, looks good.
Okay, sorry about that. It's
Oh, no problem.
for some reason it's still not the right version. I was getting save errors this morning, and obviously the edits didn't go through. However, it's still, for the most part, all here. So basically the vast majority of family therapists continued to deliver service throughout the pandemic in phase one. The top reasons why they didn't were pretty much the same as what everybody else was experiencing in their attempt to adjust and juggle and manage multiple responsibilities. Not being able to find safe and secure space to conduct the therapy in their homes because of overcrowding or because of family responsibilities. mental health services were declared non-essential, so they were told they couldn't deliver services, even though they were willing to do so via Zoom. In the early period, there was some people were limited, and then childcare and elder responsibilities like everybody else. There were mixed results. A lot of people were really struggling, like everybody, in trying to find their feet in delivering services, and 30% reported negative results, 4 very positive, and the rest basically said it was too early to tell. We did want to know if they were considered an essential service, and the vast majority were. However, those that tended to deliver mental health services in the community were not considered essential services at the beginning, and some people just didn't understand the question. So we asked, this was at the beginning, so how many were providing services in April, May, or both? And the vast majority were providing services throughout. And the few that weren't, again, it was they were on maternity leave or they didn't have access to Wi-Fi. The primary reason that individuals said that they weren't comfortable accessing services with their therapists was uncomfortable with the technology. Again, not that unusual for the first several months, but as people sort of got used to it, they continued to increase in comfort with the therapies. Now we are going in the field early in January to do an assessment of what happened during phase 2, and we'll be able to report that those changes. We did want to find out how the therapists were doing, because care for the caregivers is really important. And in fact, the therapists tended to experience less negative consequences as a result of COVID, including sleep, anxiety, sadness, irritability, and mood swings. So difficulty sleeping, they were sleeping quite well relative to the rest of the population, according to the Leger survey of this during the same period. Some were getting some therapies or some training in how to deliver therapy, but most were just limping along like everybody else, learning as they went along. Most felt that their ability to manage their life was either the same or better. A few felt it was worse, but those were the ones that gave us lots of comments about their challenges, again, like everybody else, primarily financially related because of the lack of continuity of services. The other thing about finances that a couple of the therapists had indicated and we verified is that a lot of the EAP providers dramatically reduced the hourly wage that they were prepared to pay for therapists during this period of time. And so their income dropped, even though their demands went up. They rated their physical well-being very good or excellent, again, fairly similar to the rest of the population, and their mental health was very good or excellent. Now, when we looked at sort of drill down a little bit, they did tend to report good spousal relationship, greater than the general public. They had more meaningful conversations, argued less, etc. And this too is fairly consistent with what we were seeing elsewhere, but they were really clear that they were able to operationalize some of the techniques and strategies that they were sharing with their clients. They too were having more meaningful conversations. I think that is something that we want to track and see what the implications of that are over time. Feeling closer and feeling well supported, also arguing a little less. So when we did talk about the time that they were spending with spouses, partners, friends, coworkers, again, the therapists were significantly higher than the Leger same period. Interesting around what the topics were that people were reaching out to their therapists for. Anxiety and depression were first and second, and that didn't change. But post-traumatic stress was bumped down the list, surpassed by loneliness and social isolation, and followed quickly by sleep challenges. And we know that a lot of people had sleep challenges in the first phase, not as much in the second, and we're not sure what's going to happen in the third. So we're going to be tracking that over the next several months. So going forward, what the therapists and others are asking for is more training and more support for the therapies online. To the whole question of confidentiality and security continues to be a concern, and big issues related to relationships between the therapist and their clients when the client or the therapist has moved to a different jurisdiction in order to live because they're working from home anyway. So they've gone to their cottage or they've gone to another location and they're not licensed to practice in the location where their clients are. So that's the regulatory issues are ones that are being looked at and being considered. We are looking at families who are living with violence or the threat of violence. We're starting to analyze a lot of the police services data. We do know that the number of calls have gone up and the duration of those calls have gone up, but we're trying to figure out if that's because there's fewer other calls. And so the officers who go to a household, that they're able to provide more support and able to be there longer because they're not being called to other things like traffic accidents and break and enters, or if in fact there just needs to be more service provided. We're looking at fertility intentions. We're getting stories from women who are saying, absolutely not now, not at this point, not getting pregnant, had planned to, but are going to postpone or delay. And others are saying, absolutely now's the perfect time, working from home anyway, and the eligibility for EI has been reduced significantly. And so a lot of them see that as an incentive to expand their families. We're going to be looking at immigrant and temporary worker families. So I'm interested to hear what Jasmine has to say in a few minutes. Certainly looking at seniors and people with disabilities, both those that are locked in and those who are locked out of their family members during lockdown. We are embarking on a survey in January on families in recovery. Is it easier to deal with becoming sober or clean when you're in lockdown or where distancing is an issue? And grand families. So these are families where grandparents are raising their grandchildren without parents present. So we want to know if they have any particular specialized impact. Families affected by incarceration. And we want to know whether or not the safety net or the services and benefits that are being provided are a safety net or in fact a trampoline, and we will in fact bounce back better. So that's just it in a nutshell. And I think the best quote that sort of sums it up is Charles Darwin saying that it's not the strongest species that will survive, but that which has the greatest capacity to adapt. And I think that's one thing that we have seen both within the therapy community and within families themselves, that this has been an enormous period of adaptation, and we will continue to track it and evaluate it and report on it in the months to come. If you want any more details on this, happy to provide the details and the links. And thank you so very much. Do you want to do questions now or do we want to do questions after?
I think unless anyone had an immediate question and they can get it in the short term here, we will quickly move on to doing it after, if that's okay. You can also maybe respond in the chat too directly. Perfect. If someone messages you privately, that would be great. But there's a lot of good work happening and a lot of really major questions that need to be answered and that you are answering at Vanier. So I hope everyone has a better idea of what's to come. Yeah, great. Thank you. Okay, good. You can see everyone. Can we all see the attendees? I can see the attendees. I hope everyone else can. But we're all very happy you're here. And Jasmine, Thomas, please introduce yourself, introduce what you're going to be sharing with us. And we look forward to your presentation as well.
Great. Thank you, Jillian, and thank you, Nora, for that interesting presentation. I'm quite surprised and dismayed that therapy is not considered an essential service during such a crisis, but I'm sure we can have some lengthy discussions about that. Okay, so I'm just going to share my screen here. So my name is Jasmine Thomas. I'm a postdoc researcher in sociology and criminology at the University of Manitoba. And I am, well, let's just get this going. There we go. All right. And today I'll be talking about the Wave 1 results from our CIHR-funded Differential Impact on Indigenous Peoples and Newcomers, a Socioeconomic Analysis of Canada, US, and Mexico. I presented some of these findings on the employment results just about a month ago. So I'm going to be talking a little bit about discrimination today. So first, we're all located in all different places right now. So it's interesting. I would just like to acknowledge that the University of Manitoba and I am located in Winnipeg, which is Treaty 1, and that is the traditional lands of the Anishinaabe, Cree, Oji-Cree, Lakota, Dene peoples, and the homeland of the Métis Nation. This project, I think, is really in the spirit of reconciliation and collaboration, and I think that's just really, really great and important. Just to provide an overview, I'll try my best to summarize the project and the research questions, talk a little bit about the relevant literature, and then I'll jump right into some of the descriptive survey results from Wave 1. And I've also included some open-ended responses today. And then just end off with some discussion, next step, and we'll have questions at the end. So just to acknowledge the main partners, we have the University of Manitoba, Léger, the Association of Canadian Studies, and of course CIHR, which is funding this project. We're very grateful for that. And our three primary investigators are Drs. Laurie Wilkinson and Kara Ladner at the U of M, and then Dr. Jack Jedwab at ACS. And so this project is quite ambitious. It has two phases. The first is about 12 months of surveys with approximately 7,500 participants. And then phase 2 includes qualitative interviews as well as supplemental surveys with about 150 to 500 hard to access groups in the three countries. So that's people like First Nations who are living on reserve, refugees, or people who are just more in more remote locations, particularly in Mexico. Just to provide an overview of the sample size in each country, as you can see, Canada accounts for 35%, the United States for 45%, and then Mexico's currently just at 19%. But again, that's because we will be adding on 500 participants through fieldwork, which should start hopefully in either late January or February of next year. So there's lots of questions on this project, but three primary ones. Really just to examine the differential impact of COVID-19 and the related restrictions on the mental health and well-being of Indigenous people, racialized persons, and immigrants, as well what are the normal socioeconomic inequalities faced by these groups? How does that influence their experience of COVID-19? And then, of course, because it's a comparison of three countries, are there any differences between Mexico, US, and Canada? Are there similarities, and what can we learn from this? Okay, just a little bit on the literature. So I don't think if you've been following the media, of course, it's no surprise that COVID-19 has a disproportionate impact on Black communities. As well, a Twitter analysis found that anti-Asian references had increased by almost 70% back in March. Women, of course, especially women of color, face more economic hardship and risk due to the various industries that they may be concentrated in, such as service hospitality, healthcare, and child and elder care. Indigenous people also disproportionately face impacts from COVID-19, either due to geographical remoteness or the continuing impact of colonialism. So I don't need to tell you all why this matters, but I will quickly anyway. I've used this analogy before, but I think it's important to acknowledge that COVID-19 impacts everyone, but in different ways. So I really like the idea that we're all sailing on the same ocean, but in very different boats. Some of us may be swimming. So I think that we have to acknowledge that throughout all of the work that we're doing. And one way that it really helps to conceptualize this is the work of Dr. Kimberly Crenshaw and intersectionality, which looks at the ways that race, ethnicity, class impacts our experiences and provides us either access to more resources or less. Another really great concept is that from Dr. Lynn Gell, who's an Algonquin Anishinaabe woman from Ottawa, to follow the turtle. So in sum, we should follow those who are the most marginalized in order to achieve equity. Okay, so on to some of the results. Today, I'll be discussing discrimination primarily, focusing in on race and ethnicity, and then differences for men and women, immigrants, and Indigenous people. But first, I have to give a little bit of a limitation. One major challenge that I've been grappling with this study is it's really difficult to operationalize concepts such as race across 3 different countries. It's hard to operationalize in general, but across 3 different countries with various cultural nuances, it's a challenge. Same with immigrant status. And then the other one that I've mentioned already is that Indigenous, immigrant, and other marginalized groups have less representation right now in the Mexican subsample. So please just keep that in mind with this discussion. Okay, so for the first one, what the survey asked people was, did you experience, since COVID-19, did you experience discrimination based on race? And so for the whole entire sample, this is the comparison across the 3 countries. So as you can see, in all 3 countries, Black and Asian American participants experienced high rates of discrimination. I left in the white subsample because I was interested. I was like, okay, well, what are they saying? So in Canada, 1.1%, very low. But then it's interesting, in the United States and Mexico, we see higher percentages with 5.6% of white Americans and 9.1% of white Mexicans reporting that they had experienced racial discrimination. So I think that, again, this might play into the fact that these concepts don't necessarily translate super well across borders. But I think clearly there are certain groups that are experiencing a brunt of negative impact right now. Now, for the next few slides, I selected out Black, Indigenous, and other people of color specifically to look if there were gender differences. And as you can see in Canada, between men and women, it was 12% across the board. In the United States, there was a slight difference. I don't believe this one was statistically significant, though. So, so far, at least in wave 1, it seems that the experiences are similar across genders. And just note, 0.4% of other genders were excluded from this analysis. When we move on to immigrant status, we see that, again, this is just the subsample of Black, Indigenous, and people of color, that immigrants were more likely in Canada to experience discrimination. But in the United States, it was non-immigrants. Now, this was just barely statistically significant, so it'll be interesting to see in future waves if this continues. In terms of the Mexican subsample, I should have just put an X through that because the numbers are pretty small, and we'll have to see how future analyses plays out there. Okay. Now just turning to the Indigenous subsample, which is just over 1,100 people. So I did exclude Mexico from this one because there weren't enough case numbers. So I was interested to see if there were gender differences in experiences of discrimination. And in Canada, there didn't appear to be any, but in the United States, Indigenous men, 20% of them reported experiencing discrimination compared to 10% of women. So that's an interesting difference across the two countries. Okay, so that was a lot of figures, a lot of numbers, but when it comes down to it, people have a lot to say about their experiences. And we have several open-ended questions on the survey. And so I dug into one of those. As I tell my students, don't fall into rabbit holes, but I definitely did on this one. And so in my first round of coding, I primarily pulled out instances of anti-Asian racism because it's a very dominant theme. However, with all the events of this year, over the summer, the Black Lives Matter movement, and all those intersectional issues, religion, ageism, sexism, ableism, they were all coming out quite strongly as well. But unfortunately, there were also some, frankly, racist comments and, anti-mask commentary in there as well. So there's a lot of rich data in there that we still can explore. So some of these comments, of course, include, well, they experienced discrimination because I'm Asian, because I'm Chinese. And I think what was interesting and what was different about the comments from Asian and Asian American participants was their comments related to how they had never experienced this before. Or so, for example, the last comment here, being Chinese, I've gotten sneers or rude comments. And then at the end, this has never happened before COVID. During COVID, it happens weekly or more. And I think that this really may foreshadow some of the results that we may find in the broader qualitative work that we will be starting next year. And then, of course, other participants of color and Indigenous participants just, stated as it is, they've experienced discrimination before the pandemic, and, it's nothing different. There aren't major changes just because of COVID-19. And then for Indigenous people in particular, there's the concern about remoteness and, a lack of access to healthcare and, differential treatment because of their indigeneity. So again, I think that these open-ended comments that I've just sort of started analyzing provide some sort of more rich detail about what the numbers portray in the previous slides. Okay, so just to kind of wrap up here, as we all know, existing racial disparities and experiences of discrimination are certainly going to exacerbate the impact of COVID-19. And as I mentioned, this is wave one of the project. We're hoping to get up to 8 waves, and it's such an ongoing, dynamic situation that changes so quickly. So there's many more layers of analysis yet to come. And of course, we'll be adding on more Indigenous and Afro-Indigenous representation, both mostly in Mexico, but hopefully in all 3 countries. I should mention, though, of course, we oversampled in all of the countries to ensure that there were large enough subsamples to do some of this comparative work. It's just harder to do in Mexico. So for some final thoughts, we're just sort of starting on the multivariate and cross-national comparisons. This is some of the first work that I've been doing with the cross-national stuff. And one of my big questions is, I can't wait to build a model examining, what is the impact of experiencing racism on things like mental health, fear, trust, and other indicators. Of course, it raises more questions for future waves, for qualitative inquiries. And what's coming up next? We have our fieldwork in Mexico and in Canada and the US as well, and then approximately 8 additional surveys. So just thank you to the COVID impacts team, the ACS, Leger, Mama Wepawin at the University of Manitoba, our great team of research assistants. We couldn't do it without you. Just some references, and that's it. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Jasmine. I think you'll, yeah, you pulled this together really quickly. I heard from Jack that the results just came in, I think, a week ago. Oh, right. Okay. But I mean, that's a good thing.
Yeah.
And the qualitative responses are incredible, as you pointed out. And so the timeline for this, the 8 additional surveys and the field work, I do see that there's some questions here, but is the timeline to finish all that in the next 6 months, or what's the timeline? Because just
so we've had to, the world it is, we have to be very flexible. So I think we're planning to wrap things up. I'm thinking maybe July for the surveys, and then probably not until August for the qualitative stuff, just because, I mean, in Canada especially, it's going to be tough to do qualitative interviews until it warms up. So a lot of that will probably ramp up in the spring and over the summer.
Okay, great. Great. And then we have a question here. You could probably read yourself, but Doug Norris is asking, will future surveys be with the same respondents?
Yes, there will be additional respondents, added on from sort of that, sampling that we'll be doing in the field. But yes, we'll be recruiting the same participants.
Okay, nice. And then June Francis is asking, what is the racial makeup of your senior research team?
Well, that's a good question. I don't want to speak for anyone else, but I know Dr. Kara Ladner is an Indigenous person. I don't know from what community, but I think Jack can speak for himself. And I believe Dr. Wilkinson is a white woman, so.
Yeah, okay, but true, people can identify themselves.
Yeah, I don't want to, because one thing to note is I just came onto this project about maybe 2 months ago now, so I'm still meeting everybody. Our collaborators in Mexico and the United States are as much as possible from the communities that we will be meeting with. So.
Wonderful. And what do you mean by waves, just to clarify? Great.
Sure. Yeah. So we'll be doing 8 surveys. So this was survey 1. Back to my ocean analogy.
And that's a wave, I don't know. Right? Like one survey is a wave. Right. Of course. Great.
Yes.
Great. Thanks, Edward, for that question. And then, okay. And then Zua, I'm going to allow you to talk. If you would.
Okay, thank you. Great. I didn't know how to type it. So, first, thank you for that really interesting presentation. Super fascinating results so far. So my question is about the qualitative findings on anti-Asian, anti-Chinese discrimination. And the last quote that you showed from the participant who talked about, never having experienced discrimination prior to COVID and then experiencing it now. And that strikes me as quite puzzling. And it's not the first one, right? You see these news media interviewing people of Asian descent, mostly Chinese descent, and quite a few of them are like, hey, yeah, I've never experienced discrimination before, and now all of a sudden with COVID, I'm being spat on, right? And for myself as a scholar of race and ethnicity and somebody who studies discrimination in Canada, I find that kind of data really surprising and puzzling. And I'm trying to work through it myself in my own work. And I think it might be interesting and helpful to unpack those kinds of qualitative accounts of no prior discrimination, but discrimination during COVID, specifically around anti-Asian discrimination and for Chinese Canadians by region and also by class. Because I'm thinking of the really wealthy Chinese community in places like Vancouver who are buffered, if you will, by their social class, right? They live in these ethnic enclaves that are very wealthy. They don't often interact. And then when they do, it's often the case that their social class protects them. Whereas in places like Montreal, for instance, where the Chinese population is less wealthy, you're going to find different experiences with discrimination post and pre and during the pandemic. And I think it's also important to look at the generation status of the individuals you're interviewing, because it's often the first generation who have much higher hesitancy to talk about experiences of discrimination. Whereas if you're talking to second and third generation Chinese or Asian Canadian, they're more likely to tell you that they have been experiencing discrimination and it's not something new. So thank you.
Thank you so much for those comments. I think that that's so critical. And we do, Dr. Min Zhu, for example, is doing work in this area in the United States. And so we all have our various areas of expertise. And I think that you raised such an important point about not only the generational status, but just the class and regional differences across Canada. It's so difficult to summarize this into just a few points because there's going to be so much variety based on those factors. Yeah, thank you very much.
Okay. I think we'll move on from now. I don't see any other questions for now. But if Jasmine, you want to be monitoring the chat to see if there's anything that can come up that you can answer, that would be super. Thank you so much for this presentation. Okay. Now I'll invite my colleague, Paul Holley, as many of you know, to start his presentation on week 39's tracking of the social impacts of COVID.
Okay, so here we go. Last presentation before the new year. This picture here isn't meant to exclude those. I just thought it was a pretty funny picture. Not to exclude those who don't practice Christmas, but it's a pretty funny picture of Santa Claus in a bubble at a mall in Seattle. And this is how social distancing Santa, as they're calling it, but kids are still able to interact with Santa Claus in a mall setting, obviously just with these precautionary measures in place. So that was kind of a little bit of Christmas humor there. Okay, just a quick update. You know the routine here. Let's talk a little bit about fear trends in Canada. Again, as we've seen really since, I would say, since week 27, you might say 26, Canada and the US in terms of fear has been very close to one another. There hasn't been much separation as there was earlier in the pandemic. Whereas they're actually flip-flopping back and forth now in terms of who's more afraid. So it's almost like a competition between Canada and the US here. As of the most recent survey this past week, December 11th to the 13th, we can see that 63% of Americans are afraid compared to 61% of Canadians. It was a little bit different last week, but that's the way it is this week. Okay. This map's going to be relevant in a minute here. I just wanted to give a quick overview that this is basically a GIS map of the hotspots across Canada. And this is as of December 15th, I believe, this data. So just as of yesterday. So you can see, like, over the course of the pandemic, these are where the majority of cases or contagion has spread in where these hotspots are in Canada. And this is part of Esri Canada's mapping tool that they have a lot of COVID data that they've been tracking and publishing. Here also you can see, this was interesting. This is something that a lot of us already kind of know in the back of our heads, just because what we've seen in terms of hospitalizations and deaths and so on. But if you look here in terms of cumulative number of COVID cases and deaths, so you can see the first wave here, the number of actually cases was much lower. If you see the peak here, it's much lower than the peak in the second wave, which we're pretty much in the middle of. So it appears in terms of graphically, it's still climbing, maybe starting to decline a little bit. But you can see how much higher in terms of sheer number of cases. So this is something that took me by surprise. I actually thought that for some reason there would be similar plateaus, but not so. In wave 2, much higher plateau of number of cases. However, if you look down here, the actual number of deaths were much higher in wave 1. And we know that's because for the most part, in wave 1, it was hitting, the COVID really hit seniors facilities very hard. A lot of elderly people were getting it, and the mortality rate was much higher, therefore, because of that. Whereas now in this wave, the number of deaths is lower, despite the number of cases being so much higher, because we know it's mostly youth that are getting it. It's those who are perhaps a little bit more in better health conditions than we're getting in the first wave. That's why the mortality rate's not as high. And so taking all that into consideration, one might expect or hypothesize that wherever you are geographically, if the rate of COVID is very high in that region relative to the other areas of Canada, you might suspect that fear would correspondingly be high as well. You can see here from this data, though, which basically pits the 7-day average as of, well, December 12th, because that's when the survey was administered, from the 11th to the 13th. And then the rates of people who are afraid in Canada. And you see there's not a one-to-one connection. Actually, there's a very weak correlation, because you can see in some places, like let's look at BC, for instance, you actually have a pretty low rate of COVID infection per 100,000. That's the most recent 7-day average. It's only 13.2 in BC, yet you have 2/3 of BC's residents are afraid of getting the virus. And just to give you reference, 61.5 for all of Canada. All the way over here in the Atlantic region, only 47% are afraid, and you can see that they have actually the lowest rate of cases per 100,000. So that's one that actually does match up. But like I said, BC doesn't match up. Also, if you look at, let's see, Ontario, again, a low rate of COVID infection per capita, yet still a high rate of being afraid. In Quebec, the rate of COVID infection currently it's still high, it's above average, but they have a lower rate of being afraid than several other provinces. So like I said, it's a little bit murky waters. You can't really say that there's a one-to-one connection. Fear does not, the number of cases in an area does not dictate your fear. And again, this is something we already knew from a while ago, that if you look at the positivity rate, Quebec at 71.1% is very high compared to Canada overall, 3.7%. And in terms of mortality rate, Quebec is also the highest at 4.5%. And its lowest, actually, this was kind of curious, it's lowest in Alberta in terms of the mortality rate. It's actually the lowest mortality rate of all the provinces, despite them having a high number of cases and not being very afraid. In terms of vaccines, let's get back to the vaccine analysis. You can see here that this gap isn't changing much. Really not much has changed from 2 weeks ago. So now 66% of Canadians are willing to get vaccinated, but still less than half of the American population at 48% is willing to get vaccinated as of this week. Okay, so let's look at vaccine intentions in Canada and a couple intersecting variables. We asked Canadians about their holiday shopping behaviors, what they intend to do, and also if they support or oppose a general lockdown. And we kind of crossed this with Canadians' intentions to get vaccinated. So you can see here that if you intend to get vaccinated, the vast majority of you will spend less time shopping in stores in person. So 80% say that this year compared to last year, 80% of Canadians who intend to get vaccinated will spend less time shopping at the mall or other places in public. However, if you say that you're going to spend as much time or even more time this year, you can see that only 29% basically say that they're not going to get vaccinated if they're going to spend a lot of time. So it's a very clear pattern there that Canadians who intend to spend less time shopping in person are more likely to get vaccinated. And then down here, if you look at those who support or oppose a general lockdown, you can see the Canadians who support a lockdown in their province, and this is including the closure of all non-essential businesses and services for the holiday season. Well, they're twice as likely as those who are against a lockdown to get vaccinated. So you can see here, if you support a lockdown, 74% getting vaccinated, and 37% not getting vaccinated, literally twice as high. Whereas if you oppose a lockdown, only 22% of you are getting vaccinated, 58% of you say you're not going to get vaccinated. So not only who's going to get vaccinated, but the big question is who's going to take the first vaccine. As I recall from 2 weeks ago, I think it was only about 1 in 4 Canadians intended, maybe 24% it was, intend to get the first vaccine and not wait for a subsequent one. That number's gone up a little bit higher this time around. So we're at 31% of Canadians say that they're going to take that first vaccine. But let's look at differences amongst those who say that they're going to get the first one. So if you're personally afraid of contracting the virus, you can see either if you're very afraid or somewhat afraid. Well, actually 37% of you are going to take the first vaccine, which although is not very high, it's higher than the rest of the population. Remember, the rate is about 31% of Canadians right now. Unfortunately, still 40 to 46% of Canadians who are afraid are going to wait for other vaccines to become available. So still the majority are waiting for that second round of testing or second round of vaccines to come out. And of course, the pattern is quite opposite on the other end here. So if you're not afraid at all of the vaccine, the majority of you do not intend to take the vaccine anyway. 53% of those who are not afraid at all will not take the vaccine. And that's actually quite a big jump from not very afraid. You can see only 9% of those who say they're not very afraid will not take a vaccine regardless, compared to 53% who are very afraid, or not afraid at all, rather. Also down here in the second table, if you look at individuals' mental health, we see that those who are in good mental health, or very good or excellent mental health rather, well, they're more likely to take the first vaccine once it's available. 38% of them will. And those who are on the opposite spectrum of mental health, those who are in very bad condition during this crisis, only 1 in 5 of them are actually intend to take the vaccine. So that's troubling news. And this is just an update from data you've seen before, but this is this most recent week's data. So if you're personally afraid of getting the virus, again, 3/4 of you will get vaccinated. Even if you're somewhat afraid, 3/4 of you will get vaccinated. Whereas if you're not afraid at all, less than 1 in 3 Canadians are intending to get vaccinated. And depending on their view of the virus itself, those who think that we are in the worst period of the crisis right now, as of this week, again, 3/4 of those Canadians will get vaccinated. Again, and this is something I was actually concerned about, is the longer it takes for the vaccine to get disseminated, Canadians might suspect that they don't need to take it as much because it's behind us more so. But if you say the worst of the crisis is behind us, actually only 54% of Canadians, regardless of their fear, if they think the worst of the crisis is behind us, only 54 will get vaccinated. So that number is quite a big gap between the 54 and the 74. So it really is, those people who think we're in the worst period right now are the most likely to get vaccinated. Okay, and this is just a quick update again to show you the differences demographically about who's going to get vaccinated. And then we're also going to finish off with those who intend to get the first vaccine, which is new information as well. So again, we're still seeing that males have higher intentions than females of getting vaccinated. Which is interesting because, as you recall, when we used to do the gender-based analysis of fear, females tended to have higher fear. But that's something we've seen all along. Fear is not necessarily a predictor of whether or not, for some of these, it's a driver of getting vaccinated, but not necessarily the first vaccine. You can see with adults, older adults are going to get vaccinated, 86 and 85% if you're 65 and to 74 or 75 plus, whereas that 25 to 44-year-old age group is actually the least likely to get vaccinated at only 53 to 55%. There's really no difference between visible minority status. And actually, this was interesting because before we had seen some previous differences with provinces. Now they're almost kind of all coming together in terms of it's about the same rate. About 2/3 of Canadians, regardless of what province you're in, intend to get vaccinated. So there's actually very, very little regional differences, which I found quite interesting. That's changed over the past couple of weeks. Still, those who are in urban areas, where those areas tend to be the hardest hit by the virus, they are more likely to get vaccinated. 71% versus 57% of rural residents. Recent immigrants, 77% of them are likely to get vaccinated, compared to only 66% of Canadian-born. You can see that other groups in terms of languages are most likely to get vaccinated. Higher income and higher education, they're going to get vaccinated. On the flip side, low income, low education, not willing to get vaccinated. At least half of those who make $20,000 or less, almost half, are not going to get vaccinated. Workers, about average, but the unemployed, again, 50% only are going to get vaccinated. Students actually had higher rates than workers. So here again, we have marital status. We see that divorced, separated, widowed are the most likely to get vaccinated. Of course, there might be a time of an age cohort effect there. Those in common law are the least likely to get vaccinated. This is something, again, it's peculiar to me, but if you have children, if you're a parent with children in your household, only 54% are going to get vaccinated, compared to if you have no children in your household, 71%. I'm not quite sure why that is, but in terms of health, the more positive your mental health is, more likely you are to get vaccinated. Protestants are the most likely amongst the religious groups to get vaccinated, and amongst the political parties, the Liberals and the Green parties and the Bloc Québécois, all very likely to get vaccinated. Conservatives are the least likely to get vaccinated. Okay, I know it's a lot of information. We're almost at the end of it here. So this is new information in terms of who's going to get the first vaccine, not only about getting vaccinated, but who actually wants to get the first vaccine. Again, you can see males, 35% say they're going to get the first vaccine. If you're older, if you're 65 and over, about half of you will take that first vaccine, which is extremely high relative to the 31% on average for all Canadians. Non-visible minorities, actually, there is quite a big difference here. 33% will get the first vaccine. Visible minorities, only about 1 in 5 intend to get that first vaccine. Again, with the provinces, there wasn't much difference at all. Same with the rural and urban areas. There's a little bit of a gap there. You can see that established immigrants are the least likely to get the first vaccine, whereas recent and Canadian born are about the same. In terms of language, English are the most likely to get the first vaccine. And in terms of income, there's a big gap. So if you make 100,000 or more, 37% of you will get the vaccine. Whereas if you make 20,000 or less, only 24% of you will get that first vaccine. The higher your education, the more likely you are to get vaccinated. 43% amongst those who have a master's or PhD. We looked at workers, 28% of workers versus 33% non-workers, and only 20% of students actually intend to get vaccinated. So amongst family, we have 34% of the divorced, separated, widowed, and 36% of married will get vaccinated. No children in the household, 1/3 of you will get vaccinated. Again, with mental health, the higher your mental health, the more likely you are to take that first vaccine. And in terms of religion, we can see that there's not much difference other than the non-Christian groups have less willingness to take that first vaccine. And amongst political groups, the Bloc Québécois are already in line. They're waiting for the first vaccine, as you can see, much higher than any other group, followed by the Liberal Party and NDPs. Conservative parties are on the wait and see approach more so. Okay, and that's really all I have for you for this week. These other slides we've seen before, so I'll just skip over those. Yeah, any questions? I'm open. I'll open up the floor. That's my presentation for today.
Paul?
Yes.
Can you hear me? Hi.
Hi.
It's Mona. Hi. I was wondering, like in your table with the vaccine intentions by characteristics, I think that it would be helpful if the two values for vaccine intentions of those who have kids or don't have kids, and I think that the reason why you are getting that those who don't have kids are more likely to want to be vaccinated is just an age effect.
Okay. Could be, yeah.
Because these are probably all the older people. So I wonder if it wouldn't be better to say, I don't know, is under age 60 and as children under age 18, or to limit somehow, you know, this tabulation to that.
Okay.
Because I really would think that if you do that, the results will be reversed.
Yeah, it could be absolutely.
So
One thing I didn't point out on these also, when you see like, for instance, household with no kids, it says 71% and then +4. That's just to show if there's a big change from the previous survey period. So you can see that households with kids actually went up in terms of intentions to get vaccinated by 4 percentage points, whereas married people's intentions went down by 6%.
Yeah. That's it. I don't know. Okay, I'm gonna mute myself again.
Yeah. I mean, I think there are other issues as well that we can look into further. For example, when it comes to the voters for Bloc Québécois, they're probably 99% Francophone. So that will intersect with language and some other things as well that we'll want to look into. And I think it's excellent that, Paul, you presented this sort of overview, and the type of things that Simona are pointing out are things we need to look into more deeply. I mean, we got the results 24 hours ago. So really, kudos to you to be able to do this. And clearly, it's a good overview that permits us, as we do more deep diving, to look at, what the underlying demographic issues are and put some more controls in, which you will do, at a future point.
The one thing, Jack, yeah, for sure, the Bloc Québécois are the majority French, but what was interesting is if you look at the breakdown by language, I mean, this takes into consideration a regional effect. Obviously, Bloc Québécois are in Quebec, but only 30% of French are going to take that first vaccine. So there's something really about being in Quebec and being French that, let's take it. As we know, throughout the course of the pandemic, they've demonstrated the lowest levels of fear this entire time. The Quebecers in general compared to other provinces.
Yeah, I mean, they're a segment of the Quebec electorate, so they're mostly Francophone, but they're, Francophones probably disproportionately concentrated in some parts of Quebec. That could be investigated further. I'm just saying there are underlying demographics and some of these things that probably are worth, pursuing to help explain what the sort of dominant demographic explanations are for some of these issues.
Well, I think actually I was really looking at your results on fear, and I remember like that when you looked at the reason why. Yeah, I don't remember how many weeks ago was it, but when you ask what is the reason why you're not afraid, and especially in Quebec, people were saying, well, because I'm following the recommandations de la santé publique, right? Mm-hmm. And I really think that that relationship with fear goes the other way around. I am in an area, it's kind of, if I'm very afraid, I'm more likely to do everything that I'm asked for and more, and therefore the prevalence transmission is going to be lower in that area. Mm-hmm. I don't know. Like I think that there is a number of pathways that one could trace.
Yeah, for sure. One thing I was actually, sometimes I think non-findings are the most interesting. And when I'm looking at this table right here and the table before it, that shows that there's really very little differences across provinces. I wonder what the group's reaction is to that. Does that mean there's good federal messaging going out there that all the provinces are kind of tuned into the federal government? Which I suspect if we replicate this table in the U.S., you'd have a much more variations in terms of not only fear but also intentions to get vaccinated, which I do intend to do. So I wonder whatever the group thinks about that. Is this like there's good strong federal messaging coming out in Canada, or like what's the cause why there'd be no differences across provinces?
Yeah. I mean, this is the issue we're going to be tracking very closely over the next few months as we re-hit the ground running in January. And ultimately, as more people do get vaccinated, hopefully we'll have a sufficient critical mass of people we can poll to find out what their views are, what their reactions are, because a lot of Canadians will be watching this very closely. And the 66% or thereabouts that say they're going to get vaccinated, I mean, again, when you look at the you also need to take into account that there are half of that group approximately that are saying they're going to take the first vaccine. So they're not saying they're getting vaccinated right away, right? There is a bit of built-in hesitation even amongst the 2/3 that are saying they're getting vaccinated. So we'll have to watch how that evolves in terms of what transpires going forward.
Yeah, I think that there is a timing factor in this lack of difference, because as we know very well, like here in Montreal, like in the first one of the first LRO where the vaccine was offered, 90% of the residents said that they wanted to, but only half of the personnel said that they wanted to get the vaccine right away, and the rest they wanted to wait.
Yeah, and then you got like Angus Reid is running a survey, which got a fair bit of attention. That's showing a lower percentage of persons getting vaccinated than the Leger polls are, but the question formulation is different. So we'll have to pay close attention to how the questions are formulated. We're asking about 10 or 11 questions. So we're really trying to tap into various, dimensions of the vaccination issue. But we'll see in January where things go.
Okay.
And just, as a transition, it was better that I went before Jack, because mine, we started off talking about mortality and deaths and everything, and Jack's is going to be much more cheerful. So
Well, we'll see. It's supposed to be.
I'm optimistic that it'll be.
Oh, good.
Okay. Jackie, you want to share your screen then? And
Sure.
we'll start the presentation.
Yeah. I still see Paul, so.
Yeah, I'm going to get it down in a second here. Some technical difficulties. There we go. Stop share. Okay.
Okay. Okay. So I'm going to look at one question only from our survey of this week, or focus that is on one question, look at several others as they relate to the one question, which is, has the vaccine injected some optimism into the COVID year-end mood of most Canadians? So that's something I'm going to attempt to answer with the presentation. But before I do that, I do want to say thanks, since it's our last meeting of the year, to all of you who've been dedicated participants in this meeting and other meetings, and in the network in general. It's been really, really great to get such smart people with a lot of great insights and a lot of great feedback and input to participate so regularly in what's been nearly 40 weeks of presentations of survey data. Let me thank particularly Paul Holley. We're very, very lucky to have Paul. He does absolutely outstanding work on impossible timelines in so many areas. And I just want to express our appreciation for all the work that Paul's done. And Jillian, she's just masterfully brought this together, and been interacting with many of you regularly, and has been a great moderator, taking over that role. And so I want to thank Jillian for that, and my entire team. I know some people on the team are on the call. Want to wish you all the best for the holidays and for 2021, and look very much forward to us working together next year, which is right around the corner. Let me also thank Jasmine Thomas for her presentation, and we'll be working very closely with Jasmine on the CIHR grant, and we're very fortunate to have Jasmine on board. I've known her for a short period of time, but she's done some great work already, and we're lucky to have her as part of the team. Best wishes to a number of you. I specifically want to mention my very dear friend Lori Wilkinson, I know, who's with us today, who I've known for some time, and want to wish her all the best next year, and look forward to her participating again very fully with us as we go forward in many, many projects that we're trying to disseminate. So thanks in particular to Lori, and thanks to Nora, Spinks, and Vanier and the Vanier Institute for their support for the network, and to UNESCO, and to SOCIAUX, and to other partners who's I'm probably forgetting as I try to list the various people who've supported this. And so overall, I just wanted to again reiterate notre appréciation et vous remercier pour votre participation. C'est un très grand plaisir d'avoir eu l'occasion de travailler avec vous tous pendant cette année qui était assez chargée et pleine de défis. Et j'espère que l'année prochaine va nous amener à un meilleur endroit. Et on va continuer à partager nos connaissances et notre expertise dans le cadre de ce réseau qui nous a mis ensemble afin de mieux comprendre les aspects sociaux de COVID-19. So, on to the presentation. So, has the vaccine injected some optimism into the COVID year end? Well, actually, the vast majority of Canadians looking to 2021 are doing so with optimism, although they're doing so cautiously, right? So you can see that 84% of Canadians, when we put the question to them, given the news about the forthcoming vaccine and looking ahead to 2021, would you say that you're feeling optimistic? Very, 15%, somewhat, 70%. So about it's 84, we're a little bit of rounding. So Most of us are optimistic as a result of the vaccine, but we are cautiously optimistic. Now, I decided to do a little comparison with my home province, and we're a tad more optimistic at 87%. That's kind of in the margin of error compared to 84% for the rest of Canada. But again, general optimism, independent of where you are across Canada. But as I said, there's a high level of, or high percentage of people saying they're somewhat optimistic, which I would equate with being cautiously optimistic. Right, so on the basis of age cohorts, again, we're seeing pretty much across the board similarities, other than the fact that the youngest cohort, 18 to 24, are, and the oldest cohort, 65 plus, are the most optimistic. It's the groups between 25 and 44 where you see about a 15-point drop in terms of optimism. But again, it's rough similarity for the very optimistic. It's the cautious optimism that you're seeing sort of diminish somewhat in that 25 to 44 group, and hence you're seeing the little more pessimism in that age cohort, which is worth further exploration. So, oops, what just happened? Sorry, folks. Right, sorry. Right, so yeah, the Christmas shopping thing wasn't as interesting. The most optimistic amongst us are most likely to take the vaccine once available, right? So, oops, okay. The most optimistic, as I said, and you can see a very strong variation, right? So that the more you say you're very optimistic about 2021, the far more likely you're saying you're going to get vaccinated. The people who are more pessimistic about 2021 are the ones that are least optimistic, rather, excuse me, the least likely to be vaccinated. Yes, the most optimistic amongst us are most likely to want the vaccine to be mandatory, although even in that group, more people would rather have it offered on a volunteer basis rather than make it mandatory, but they're more likely to want it mandatory. But as I say in brackets, they have no reason to be optimistic that that will be the case, since the likelihood of it being mandatory, at least on a provincial or national scale, is not in the cards, it seems, at this time. Yes, the most optimistic, this may seem paradoxical to some of us, but it actually isn't as paradoxical, necessarily counterintuitive, but the most optimistic for 2021 are most fearful of getting the virus. In other words, those people who are pessimistic, right, over here, are very somewhat afraid. About half of them are fearful of getting the virus. It's the people who are most optimistic and somewhat optimistic that are most afraid of getting the virus. So the suggestion here is that the vaccine is the antidote, if you'd like, to diminishing their fears and making them more optimistic. And yet another potential paradox, though a little sort of further consideration would suggest, again, nothing counterintuitive here. The more that you are optimistic for 2021, the vaccine, the more you support a lockdown of non-essential businesses. Right? The least optimistic, the more you're pessimistic, the least likely you're supportive of those lockdowns. So the most optimistic amongst us, who are saying we're getting we're very excited about the vaccine, so to speak, or makes us more optimistic for 2021. Want to hang in there with the lockdown still. So so feel that those are the things that'll get us to pass this and make us feel more optimistic. So our optimism is connected to these safety measures as well for those individuals. Will we continue with those safety measures? Well, if you're very optimistic, then yes, you believe we will continue with safety measures. The less optimistic you are, the less likely you think that we're going to continue those safety measures going forward. That is, say, social distancing and other safety measures. And not surprisingly, the most optimistic amongst us are reporting the best mental health assessments, right? So which we can see here. The most pessimistic are reporting very bad or bad health assessments at about 1 in 3, and 1 in 3 in the somewhat pessimistic as well. So much better on this end. Optimism and mental health seem to be very much related in this case. Now, before I go to the very last slide, there was one I missed out, which was up here, not an essential one, but on the issue of, oh yeah, sorry. Yeah, that was it. Yeah, so this one I sort of dropped. Now, This one. So the people who are most optimistic think that the vaccine will be ready at around Christmas 2020. In other words, in about a week or so. So the most optimistic are most likely to believe we're getting the vaccine for Christmas. That's what, the numbers suggest here, right? From this end to this end. The more pessimistic are more likely to feel that it's going to be at a later point. In fact, those most pessimistic don't know or say never, right? Which again is not out of line with the issue of fear, feeling pessimism. Now, as regards New Year's resolutions, I actually, my New Year's resolution, I'm sure all of you have your own, would be that we get rid of the contagion. Right? So, but that isn't the New Year's resolution that most people are making. Most people have more practical New Year's resolutions. So here's the question that we asked in that regard. We put to the survey population, are the New Year's resolutions you plan to make related to the following? It was an open-ended question, and it was, no, actually it was not. It was a closed-ended question. Those were some of the answers that we gave. Being more active, improving your fitness, improving your eating habits, losing weight, improving your finances, improving your mental health, taking more time for yourself, spending more time with your friends and family, improving your sleep habits, being more organized, learning a new skill or hobby, giving back more, getting a new job. Actually, I just sort of flipped the switch. It was an open-ended question, right? So these were the sort of cumulative responses. Women gay had more to say in these matters. Men actually weren't as big on New Year's resolutions. Hence, since there were multiple opportunities to respond, in other words, you give more than one response to the question, you got higher percentages of women focusing on some of these resolutions than you did men, many of whom simply didn't respond to the question. So that's it. That's my sort of, if you like, optimistic spin on this crisis in terms of how people view 2021. And I would say that my sincere hope is that the optimism that people are expressing, cautious and otherwise, for 2021 gets translated into a reality next year and permits us to meet, as I've said on previous occasions, as a social impacts network in person rather than virtually. Stop share. There you go.
Those are some pretty great closing words. I think we'll leave it at that. Yes?
Unless there's a closing comment or question from anybody, if anyone has anything to say, then, speak now or forever hold your proverbial peace. It's a very subdued group. It's okay.
Yeah. Okay. Anyone? It's been great participation though today. Thank you everyone so much. And yeah. Oh, good. There we go. Nora has just put in the chat here. Thanks everyone. Wishing you all the best in the new year. So I think we all echo that for each other.
I also would like to wish everybody happy holidays. And this is, I want to say that participating to this group has been one of the good things of 2020 for me. So.
And thank you, Simone. It's been a pleasure to meet you. And we've had a great opportunity to already do some stuff together and look forward to working together next year.
Yes, me too. Thank you, Jack. And thank you, everyone, the whole team. Thank you.
Awesome.
There you go. Thank you, Min.
All right. Thank you, everyone.
Thanks, everyone.
Bye.
Thank you,
Happy
Kira.
holidays.
Happy holidays, everyone. Goodbye.
Thank you, Edward. Thanks, Jasmine. Bye.